for these big capital investments that we're talking about.
Thank you. Why don't we move to Q&A? Feel free to stand up. I don't know if there's mics out there or not, but stand up and state your name, where you're from, and your question.
Hello and good morning. My name is LaJay Rees. I attend North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, majoring in construction management. I kind of want to shift the focus just a little bit, kind of just to break the ice. My question is, how are you balancing your work life and personal life, and what hobbies are you doing as well?
Thank you. Who wants to tackle that?
Boundaries, what are those?
So I'm happy to take a first crack at that. It's a great question. Work-life balance is very hard, right? Especially for, I think, anybody in this room, a group of folks who are very dedicated and passionate about what we're trying to do. I think work-life balance can be a challenge. But it's incredibly important, right? It's incredibly important to be able to take a step back and recharge and refuel. It's incredibly important to be able to, work is not everything, right? It's a part of what we do in our livelihoods, right? And so hobbies for me are spending time with my family, right? I have aging parents. Spending time with them, being able to have opportunities to engage with them because I know they're not going to be here for that much longer, right? Also thinking about the things that I find joy in that go beyond sort of being in the office or being engaged with some of the teams that we work with and so forth, right? So this is going to sound weird, I know, but if I had been in a different career, I would have probably been a TV meteorologist. It's something that I just love to do, is to understand more about the weather and the dynamics of the weather. Growing up in this area in particular, there used to be more snowstorms than there are today. I used to love snowstorms because it would be a day out of school, right? So I would sit there and look at the radar and see, are we going to be out of school or not? Because who knows what the actual TV meteorologist thinks? Why would they know more than I do? So this is just something that I've always enjoyed doing, and I make sure that I find the time for it because it keeps me, keeps me with a change of pace, right? So I think that you're absolutely right to ask that question, and it's absolutely something that folks should think about. Also, it's every reason why I said earlier, what you do for your career, what you do in the morning, you have to find joy in, you have to find passion in, you have to be excited about. Because otherwise, it's going to be work. Whereas when I wake up every morning, yes, there's the life part, right? But there's also, I'm excited about going into the office too, because I'm excited about being able to talk to folks like you all, right? I'm excited about the prospect of being able to invest and have, hopefully, a little bit of a change for the better for the nation and for the world as well.
Yeah, and I'll respond to that too. I think this may sound radical, but I think balance is an illusion. I'm 58 years old. I've yet to achieve it, and I struggle with it. But I am centered, and so I would make the case for trying to achieve centeredness, and don't worry so much about the balance, although I think it's always going to be a struggle to balance life, work, passions that you may have. I don't know anybody who's been, except for maybe the Dalai Lama, who's perfectly balanced. But I think as you travel through life, you'll find places where you can achieve some centeredness and some inner peace. And I think that's the ultimate objective, in my opinion.
So I'll add a little bit to that. I try not to have different aspects of my life compete with one another. I think we silo our lives, and we have various areas of our lives competing with others. I'm a grandfather. I'm a husband. I've been married for 43 years. All of those things don't compete with my work life, and I think it goes back to what Chad said. Balance. 4 things that I focus on: knowing who I am, being very clear about who I am and what drives me to make the decisions that I make. I'm not the same today that I was last week because of the experiences. So I'm different in every moment based on what I've learned. The other part of that is, what's my purpose? What do I see as my purpose in life? because we all have something that, a purpose, a sense of mission, and you have to be clear about what that is. The third thing is mind, body, spirit. Make sure that you're physically, mentally, spiritually, your best self at all times. That takes work. It takes work. And the fourth thing is practice forgiveness. And the first person that you have to forgive is yourself, because you're going to make mistakes or missteps along the way. And if you can forgive yourself and not get caught up on holding things against other people, then your path in life will be a lot easier. But those are my 4 pillars, and you could take away from that what may help you. Thank you.
Well said. Other questions?
Morning.
Good morning.
I have 2 questions actually. Both are directed towards Erwin because you're on the NSF. So, first question is, sorry, I actually forgot to introduce myself. I'm Michael. I'm a sophomore chemistry major at Fisk University. I'm also enrolled in a chemical engineering program at Vanderbilt. So, I do rocket research at Fisk, and we lack equipment for most of the stuff that we do. For example, one of my earliest experiences was we needed a scanning calorimeter to get some data, and we had to borrow that from Vanderbilt. And I asked my professor, why are we going to Vanderbilt to borrow equipment? Like, we're in a university, you know. I'm Nigerian, so back home I'm familiar with that kind of experience, but I didn't expect to meet that here. So I just wanted to know, with regards to NSF, how do they go about funding HBCUs with equipment? Because I talk with other researchers in other HBCUs, and I found out that Fisk is apparently on the higher end of the spectrum. So that got me worried with regards to that. You know, that's one. And then second question is, like I said, I'm an F1 student. So we participated in the National Eclipse Ballooning Project that was organized by NASA, and that was held twice, in October and in April, for both eclipses. And between both of them, we started work in March last year, and we put in just under 300 hours, because it was about 6 hours a week leading up. So by April, we had put in just under 300 hours of work. And some of my counterparts on the team are, you know, US citizens, and they were getting paid for that. But I found out as a foreign national, you can't get paid for that, because it's apparently the grant that they used to pay for that is government funded. So, and I learned again, because my professor got some grant from the NSF, and then he said the same thing, that it is a US government grant, so it doesn't cover foreign nationals. I just want to know what the rationale behind that is.
So those are both great questions. So let me try to tackle each one of those in turn. So first, with regard to equipment, experimental equipment, experimentation at HBCUs across the country. So this is something that, when I said earlier, it's really incumbent upon an agency like NSF to support the capacity building at institutions of higher education and diverse institutions of higher education. This is partly what I was alluding to, right? It's incredibly important for us to acknowledge that, you know, I've been to Vanderbilt, I've been to Tennessee, right? And I can appreciate that it's not just the symbolism of having to drive to utilize equipment that you could potentially just have on campus at Fisk. It's also just the time and the effort that takes that detracts from your ability to be able to do the work that you want to be able to do, right? And so I think that we have investment programs around infrastructure, around facilities, where we are trying to be able to provide for some of the resources. We call them research resources, right? And every time we invest in the research, we should also be thinking about the resources that you need to make that research possible, and vice versa as well. And so there's clearly more work for us to be able to do. You're, I think, living proof of that in the experience that you've had at your institution, but it is something that we are really trying to prioritize is how do we grow that infrastructural support? And also, how do we do that not just in a vacuum as NSF? You directed the question at me, and I fully appreciate why and so forth. But I think it's really important for us all to acknowledge that this is a cross-sector challenge. This is a cross-sector issue, right? You think about, if I can lean on Jared for just a second, right? Let's take AI, for instance. To be able to innovate in artificial intelligence, you need to be able to have access to some of the foremost computing infrastructure, data infrastructure that's out there. The lion's share of that infrastructure is in data centers that are operated by, or compute centers that are operated by some of our world-leading companies that are headquartered here in the United States, right? And so that's actually why one of the things that we are focused on at NSF right now is something that we call the National AI Research Resource, to try to stitch together, federate, if you will, resources from companies like Microsoft, as well as the other companies you mentioned that you've worked at, Apple, Meta, and so on, right? But also federate together some of the resources that we are deploying so that you can have the kind of remote access to compute and data and software workflows and even the expertise on how to use that infrastructure, right? How do we make that available so that we can democratize access to anyone, anywhere, at any institution across this country? So it is high on our mind and something that we clearly need to do better at. The second question that you asked about being on an F1 visa or being a foreign national coming here into the United States, there's a lot that can be said about our nation's immigration system and the challenges that we face on that front. But I'm going to address the specific, I think that that's a conversation that's worth having because it impacts who all can engage in the STEM enterprise, and it impacts the balance that we need to see between our talent here in the US, future generations for you having opportunities to engage in STEM, but also balancing that with talent from abroad that we need to come to the US to have the kind of impact and perspective that we need for the STEM fields. But if I leave aside that and I focus on grants and federal dollars, I will just stress that, yes, there are some programs, like the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, for instance. There are some programs at NSF where either by statute by Congress or for related reasons, there tends to be a focus or exclusivity around US citizens or permanent residents. But the vast majority of the investment that we make out of NSF in terms of research grants, we actually do have students who are on visas who are supported through those research grants, and the dollars can go to them. So there is a sense of what the source of the grant was that caused your faculty member to say what they did to you. But I will say that in general, we are about trying to support talent from everywhere, including those who